Dr. Amrita Hazra is the principal investigator and assistant professor and a well known face at the IISER Pune campus. Born to chemist parents, her interest in science was lit and fanned from a very early age. From her graduate and postdoctoral research in vitamin biosynthesis, she now works on enzyme mechanics and biological chemistry of microbes. She is also greatly interested in science education and outreach and democratizing science for all backgrounds. Dr. Amrita Hazra completed her bachelor's and master's in chemistry from Jadavpur University, Calcutta 2000 to 2003 and Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur 2003 to 2005 respectively. She obtained a PhD at Cornell University in chemical biology with Tag Bagley in 2010. This was followed by a postdoctoral stint at the Department of Plant and Microbial Biology at the University of California, Berkeley with Mishitaga. She joined IISER Pune as an assistant professor in December 2015.
In my lab, we study how these vitamins are made by plants and microorganisms in their cells. And these microorganisms and plants have biosynthetic pathways or pathways by which they take certain starting materials and convert them to vitamins, which are the products of these pathways. And these vitamins are important for our well-being. And so we are really reliant on our diet for getting these vitamins and similar micronutrients. So why are these called micronutrients is because you need them in very tiny quantities, but they are absolutely essential for your well-being. When you don't have these vitamins, there are a range of deficiency diseases that people get, including very serious ones such as neurodegenerative diseases. So knowing how these small molecules like vitamins, which are micronutrients, are made in nature is a very important very important area of research. And more importantly, it is important for us to know how we get them, where should we get them, where should we find them in our diet. So fermentation is very linked to this question because microorganisms are very capable of making these important vitamins and micronutrients for us, and there's plenty of microorganisms that reside within our own bodies. And our gut, the human gut, is a treasure house of multiple bacteria, archaea, fungi, which not only live in our gut but also provide us with a lot of great micronutrients.
Professor Rekha Vinay Kumar Divekar has an MSc First Class in Organic Chemistry. She was a lecturer at the Satye College, Vileparli. She retired in 2010 after 35 years in service. She is the mother of the renowned health coach Rujita Divekar. She currently practices organic farming at Sonave, near Safari, just outside Mumbai. Post her retirement, she has been giving talks and conducting workshops on topics like chemistry in the kitchen, yoga and ahar, staying youthful forever, slimmer waist and fuller life, etc., across India and abroad.
What can you say about the history of fermented foods? It goes back thousands of years. Why it goes back to thousands of years? Because we read in our religious text about Somras. Now, what is Somras? Gods were consuming Somras, and Somras is nothing but fermented drink only. And from that time, the fermented foods are having importance, and unknowingly they may not be knowing about what is the significance for our health, but they are so much important for us to maintain good health, not only physical but mental also, and even our brain health improves due to these fermented foods.
How are we going to eat such that we get all these good molecules, these good vitamins for ourselves? And one easy way to do it is to incorporate fermented foods into our regular diet.
Now, let me tell you about what is actually fermentation. So, fermentation is nothing but the process of preservation of foods just by natural processes. Look, we are not using here any artificial chemical which is called as preservative, We are not keeping it in the fridge also. We are not lowering down the temperature sub-zero and all that. But just we are carrying out some natural processes due to which the foods can be preserved.
You must have heard about food like kombuchas, food like sourdough bread. Now, each of these are actually sources of bacteria, and each of these are fermented food. But interestingly, also those foods which are made in your kitchen all the time, like dahi or yogurt, dosa batter, are powerhouses of bacteria and microorganisms which are fermenting the substrate, which is the grains in the case of dosa, milk in the case of dahi, to give you a product which is really good for your health and is packed with micronutrients which come out of fermentation.
So what happens during fermentation? In fermentation, what we are doing is we are using some microorganisms. Now, what are these microorganisms? These microorganisms are either yeast or some bacteria. And when these are added to certain foods which contain normally carbohydrates, that is starches or sugar, then these foods get converted into organic acids, alcohol, and some gases. So this is the chemical reaction. This is the chemistry behind the fermentation. What is happening is we are converting glucose or starch into the organic acids.
Process of fermentation requires or is defined as a transformative process of getting energy without using oxygen. So transforming carbohydrates into or using carbohydrates as a source of nutrition without the use of oxygen and generating byproducts from it is defined as fermentation. Now, the absence of oxygen is an important operative term, though it does not mean literally that there will be no oxygen. So, for example, when you think about fermentation in your yogurt, the lactobacilli species of bacteria which are present in the dahi and are converting the milk and using the milk sugars into your final product, which is yogurt, and deriving energy in the process. Those organisms, the process is of course happening in air. It is happening in your kitchen. There is obviously no lack of oxygen in your kitchen. It's just like the rest of your house. But these organisms are doing their job without using the molecular oxygen that is present in the atmosphere. So that's what I mean by in the absence of oxygen.
Now, why they are so much important for our health? I want to tell you that our body contains bacteria which is called as gut flora. There are large trillions of bacteria which are present in our body, particularly in our gut. Okay, so this gut bacteria and all the bacteria which are present in our body, for example, they are present here, then here, nostrils, in the mouth, and then everywhere on our skin also they are present. And how many of them are present? Their number is almost equal to the cells which are present in our body. That is, say, in our body is made up of X number of cells. Then we are having actually X number of bacteria, or even more than that. So many bacteria are present in our body, and don't get frightened by just bacteria, because there are useful bacteria. There are more number of useful bacteria only. There are very less number of pathogenic bacteria. And if this bacteria, the variety and the number is greater, remember, if the variety and the number of bacteria, useful bacteria which are present in our gut, if it is more, we are healthier. Now, as I told you, we are having history of fermenting foods. Now, for example, I will tell you what we used to do, or we are doing right now also. We are utilizing sun heat, solar heat. And in the month of, say, March, April, and May, we cook, or I think we make many things which are in Marathi, we call them as Valvana. So Valvana is nothing but we are doing certain things and allowing it to dry in sun. Now chunda, you take the example of chunda. What we do when we are preparing chunda, we have to grate kacha aam, raw mango we have to grate, mix it with sugar, same quantity, that is the recipe you can find out anywhere. Mix them well and keep this mixture in heat, in the sun. And what will happen after 6 to 8 days, you will be getting chunda, which can be preserved at room temperature for 2-3 years also. Similarly, we make many types of pickles. For example, achar, jo achar or pickle we are making out of kacha aam. There also, what we are making is we are adding excess of salt and excess of oil so that there will be growth of bacteria. Now see, when I told you the definition of fermentation, that is we are adding some bacteria or yeast, and then we are converting the starches or the sugar into certain compounds. You may feel that, oh, bacteria are so bad, but it is not so. There are two types of bacteria. There are useful bacteria also, and there are pathogenic bacteria also. So here we are using useful bacteria for fermentation, and the growth of bacteria will happen in these fermented foods. So there are so many varieties of fermented foods which are coming in the market nowadays, like sourdough bread or kefir or kombucha, etc. But we are managing, or we are having so many of fermented foods in our own culture. So I think that you should use those fermented foods in larger amounts, because you are genetically, you are prone to digest all these foods very well.
So it's very interesting. Anthropologists think that civilization actually centered around alcohol. Ancient man discovered how to make alcohol. Okay, I won't get into what kind of alcohol, but it was meads. And because ancient man wanted to make more of alcohol, he realized that grain is easier to cultivate. Okay, and you don't get enough grain growing wild, so you have to kind of really settle down in one location. And so nomadic tribes started to become sedentary. I wouldn't say sedentary, but actually localized. And that's how agriculture began. And because agriculture began from there, civilization started to center around agriculture. And so the advent of civilization in the history of mankind is around alcohol. At least that's one theory that anthropologists believe, and that's the theory that I strongly believe in as well. And meads are interesting because meads are supposedly the oldest alcoholic beverage known to mankind. Meads predate beer. It predates wine by I don't know how many millennia. The theory of how meads was discovered is actually quite straightforward. Imagine ancient man, hunter-gatherer, found a comb full of honey. Okay, again there are rock paintings going back to I think 5000 BC in France showing ancient man kind of collecting honey. So imagine like combs of honey. You want to prevent insects from coming onto those combs of honey. So you've stored them in ceramic pots, on clay pots with water on top. And you start, like every time after a meal you want something sweet, or you want some of the honey for sweetening your beverage or food. Ancient man would put his hand inside, scoop out the honey, pull it out, and use the honey. But every time he puts his hand inside, there's a little bit of mixing of the water with honey. And that honey water mix, I mean what we now call must, wild yeast falls on top, fermentation starts. And once all the honey is done, there is honey which is mixed into that. Ancient man picks up that pot, drinks it, and he's like, yum, it's slightly sweet, it's alcoholic, okay, so it's good both ways. And that was the first mead. And this obviously, it's the only alcohol which can occur in nature naturally. Like, it does not require intervention by man. Most alcoholic beverages are classified by the fermentable sugar, which is the source of the alcohol. So beer, the fermentable sugar is barley malt, which is the malt, the starches in the malt are converted to fermentable sugars, which are then fermented by yeast into alcohol. In wine, the fermentable sugars come from grapes. In a cider, the fermentable sugar comes from apples. And in mead, the fermentable sugar has to come from honey. And that is the basic broad categorization of why meads are different from beer, because we use honey to convert into alcohol as opposed to beer.
So kombucha is effectively a fermented tea which has a lot of like gut health benefits to its name.
So how do these microbes in kombucha actually convert this tea and this sugar into these probiotics? What's the science behind it?
Scientific process behind this fermentation is that the yeast first eats the sugar and converts that into ethanol, and then the bacteria get to work. I mean, Acetobacter is the main family of bacteria, but there's also Lactobacillus and so many other these things that they form the pellicle of the SCOBY. And this whole process is effectively the food for the microbes here is the sugar. And also because we use tea for it, there are certain polyphenols in the tea that also aid into the whole fermentation process. And typically the first step of making kombucha would take about say 7 to 8 days. And then after that, as and when it's reached the flavor profile that you like of acidity, then you can add some like flavors or fruits or herbs in the secondary fermentation. And I mean, it's a lot of fun making kombucha. So, you know, then you can experiment with different things like that.
The oldest form of bread that is known to mankind was the naturally leavened kind. And it was probably discovered in ancient Egypt, and most likely discovered accidentally, because somebody must have left a mix of flour and water aside for a couple of days. And when it was baked, they found that it was more tasty and lighter than a regular baked loaf of bread. And that's how it was probably discovered. So the role of microbes in the process of bread making is, it's pretty extraordinary in the way that it basically transforms a very simple mix of flour and water into something that is way more digestible to a human body. And we use a starter to make the bread, and the starter essentially is a symbiotic colony which constitutes wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria. How they work essentially is that the wild yeast produces a variety of enzymes which helps break down the starches in the grain or the wheat that we are using to make the bread. The starches get broken down into sugars, and in the process CO2 is produced. At the same time, the lactic acid bacteria is known to break down phytic acid in the grain. Just to reiterate, the phytic acid is actually known as an anti-nutrient simply because it inhibits the absorption of minerals in the body. So lactic acid breaks that down, and these two microbes work in conjunction with each other to produce a bread that is light and airy, sour in taste, and also very digestible and very nourishing to the body.
Actually, you all know that when we are making idlis, we are taking rice and dal in certain proportion and we grind, and then the mixture is allowed to stand. See, we are not heating it. We are just allowing it to stand for say 8 to 10 hours, depending upon what is the weather, whether it is a cold atmosphere or hot atmosphere. Depending upon that, if it is hot, then it will get fermented fast. So what is happening here is, it is getting, because naturally also there are some bacteria which are present in foods, and they themselves help sometime in fermenting. And then in the morning, that is, if at all you keep the mixture at night ready, then in the morning you will get the fermented. You can see that it has come up, the mixture has come up, You can see the bubbles, that is, there are some gases which are evolved also during this process, and then you make idlis. And you know that if you keep it for a longer time, then the number of bacteria goes on increasing. The acid will be becoming stronger, and you can taste it, that if you are over fermenting it, then what will be the result? You will not get good quality of idlis. So it is a technique that how much you have to ferment for every fermented food. In Maharashtra, there is a good pakwan or mithai, which is called as anarse, which is difficult to make. You must have observed that it is very difficult to make anarse at home. And even if you go and buy from market now, because there are available in market also, it is very difficult to find good quality anarsa, because here what we are doing is we are soaking rice for about 3 days. Every day we are changing the water, and then fermentation happens in that rice, and then we are mixing it with good jaggery, and again allowing it to stand for some days. And after that, when we make anarsa, you can see that it is having you can see that it is like jali which is formed in the anarsa, which gives us the indication that it is fermented, isn't it? Even dhokla, idli, you can see the food looks also, the texture of the food is also different. So lots of foods, ambil, have you heard about ambil? This ambil can be made out of ragi, out of jawar. So in Rajasthan also, there are different varieties of pickles which are made, and especially it is important in that area because they don't get fresh vegetables very often, because you know that it's sandy, and sandy area totally, and you don't get good vegetables. So whenever they get these vegetables, they pickle them. And you know that they also make out of these dals and pulses also what is called as sandge. That is, they are taking different varieties of dals and pulses, grind them with spices, make small dumplings, and allow it to again keep them in the sun for some days. And after some days, they get dried up. And once they get dried up, you can make sabji, you can make vegetable out of it, which is very tasty and yummy. Okay, so we have culture of having fermented foods. Now, what are the important health benefits you get from these fermented foods? So probiotics, what are probiotics? Probiotics are the useful bacteria which are present in fermented foods. Okay, so this probiotic bacteria will be present in curd, in buttermilk, in idli, in dhokla, all the fermented foods, even in achar. These bacteria will be present, which are called as probiotics. And what are prebiotics? Prebiotics are the foods which are the foods for probiotic bacteria. That is, the probiotic bacteria thrive on prebiotic foods. And what are these prebiotic foods? Prebiotic foods are, say, banana or different grains, pulses, fruits, etc. So we should have ideally the combination of these probiotics along with prebiotics. Okay, so the fermented foods are nothing but probiotics, and you can have along with prebiotics. For example, if you go to South India, you will get idli and dosa, so many things, and along with it, normally those people, they serve elaichi banana. So they are providing us the combination of probiotics along with prebiotic. Okay, so which is very useful for our health. So I will advise you to use curd, buttermilk daily in your diet, which is a fermented food. And along with that, of course, you can have idli, dhokla, and all these pickles, murabbas, chunda, papads, etc. So large number of variety is available for us. Now, what are the different health benefits that we are getting from this fermented foods? Most important, which are we are having less risk of heart diseases. Then our immunity gets a boost. Now see, nowadays immunity has become actually a catchphrase. Everybody is talking about immunity, but immunity doesn't come overnight. So for your entire life, you have to consume such good foods so that your immunity becomes stronger and stronger, your digestion becomes good, and there is gut-brain connection also. So your emotional health also improves, your brain health also improves. So there are so many benefits of these fermented foods.